first, Mr. Bansal. Now, this visit surely brings back memories of a dressing down that President Zelenskyy got from President Trump. We do hope that there's no repeat of that. But Trump recently hinted that the ball is now in Zelenskyy's court and that Ukraine can stop the war. But the big question is, on what terms? Can peace truly be achieved by betraying the map?
See, there is no doubt from what President Trump said that not only Crimea and NATO membership, a certain part of Donbass and maybe other provinces may also have to be foregone. To me, it seems that what Trump is going to propose to Zelenskyy is to swap some territory to bring back peace. Now, whether that will be acceptable to Zelenskyy and his European allies is a big question mark, because Zelenskyy will find it very difficult to sell it to his domestic public opinion, because after having fought a war for so many years, now if you are going to lose territory, it will not be a very easy proposition for Zelenskyy to sell it to his domestic public. And that may be a little difficult. But he also is henpecked because he doesn't have the support, he doesn't have the wherewithal. And I think Ukrainian economy, Ukrainian public is bleeding through this war. So it only depends on how much pressure can the Europeans bring upon Trump, or how much support can they assure Zelenskyy to take a stand.
Absolutely. In fact, as you point that out as well, Mr. Joshi is also joining us on the broadcast as well. Thank you for taking the time out, Mr. Joshi, given what we heard in terms of opening remarks as well. How do you essentially read into this? More importantly, given what we saw, and rather how we saw it pan out last time?
Well, I think it's very obvious Captain Bansal has laid out the issues. You have a situation where the war has actually bled both countries, but Russia is a much bigger country and can sustain the war for a longer period. So a great deal depends on the extent to which the Europeans are able to pressure the Americans, because I don't think, as President Trump had said the last time he met Zelenskyy, you don't have any cards. He said you don't have any cards. And so, yes, Ukraine doesn't have any cards, but the Europeans do. And the Europeans have actually, in the last year or so, begun a process of rearmament. They are actually seriously concerned about the consequences of failure in Ukraine, and they are really worried about their security. And this is something I think they will put a lot of pressure on Trump. But the point is, what exactly is Trump up to? Meaning the very fact that he completely conceded a peace agreement before a ceasefire signals that, as far as he's concerned, he's wearing a Russian hat. Now, we don't know what the consequences of that will be in the coming meeting at the White House.
Right, Mr. Joshi. In fact, let me take you back to Mr. Bansal's comments. He stated that Donbass might have to be foregone, and of course, we've seen the tweet by Donald Trump as well, referring to Crimea and, of course, that NATO membership. But let me ask you: would Ukraine choose to stand firm on not ceding any land, even if it means prolonging the war? What could be offered in order to bring about a comprehensive peace deal between both the sides?
Well, I think that there could be a ceasefire line along the existing, front in Luhansk and Donbass, asking the Ukrainians to concede areas which they have defended with a huge amount of grit, meaning the Russians have had a really difficult time advancing in Donbass, meaning they have had to go literally half a kilometer by half a kilometer. So it's not, and so it would be too much to expect the Ukrainians to simply hand over the rest of Donbass to the Russians. And at the same time, I think the original concept of the swap, that if the ceasefire lines currently operating in the Donbass and Luhansk area can be the border, plus the Russians clear out of Zaporizhia and the Kherson front, which gives the Ukrainians a maritime frontage, which secures their port of Odessa as well. Of course, as far as Crimea is concerned, I don't see any turning back of the clock. That's a more complex kind of a thing. So I don't think there'll be any shift there. And of course, the issue of whether Ukraine should be in NATO or should not be in NATO is also something that can be handled in a different way.
Absolutely. In fact, as you pointed out, Mr. Bansal, coming back to you, given the opening remarks that you did make, and we did hear what Mr. Joshi also had to say, but the other aspect of this, deal or no deal, has India already moved away from the US sphere, or at least till Trump is in the White House? How do you look at that?
See, as long as President Trump is in White House, it's very difficult to plan for it because his actions will continue to be knee-jerk, and even his aides or his administration, the other officials, don't know what he's going to come up with. So with Trump in White House, it's very difficult for India to make a policy. Having said that, we need to understand that what brings India and US together is not only interests, but more importantly, common values. The common values of democracy and pluralism bind us. And this has been further strengthened by the rise of Indian diaspora. Now, these factors will continue to bring the two countries together. But as long as Trump is ruling roost, and we have seen that there has been a significant downturn as far as the bilateral relations are concerned, and the way the trade talks have been postponed, the way tariffs have been imposed unilaterally, the situation is not improving. I think the public opinion in India is shifting very fast. And I think today, the approval rating of US and President Trump have fallen significantly. Now, with that sort of a scenario, I think in the short term, we see a significant downturn as far as India-US relations is concerned. And I feel next year, when the midterm elections take place with US, till then, I really don't see a very significant improvement. Of course, if things can be frozen at this level also, it will be, I think, good. But the way trade talks have been deferred,
right,
and I think now talk of further tariffs is in the air, I don't visualize any significant improvement in near future.
Right, Mr. Bansal, but we've also heard from the US president that there is still some time before secondary tariffs, sort of really come into effect. And he's hinted at some possible relief. So India is really banking on that. In fact, sources have also suggested that geopolitical developments, whether it's by India or by other countries upon whom tariffs have been imposed, they are being looked at with a lot of interest and very keenly. And we'll have to see the outcome of these talks and, when a new date is finalized by the Indian side and, of course, the United States side on resumption of these, the trade deal talks, as it were. But let me come to you, Mr. Joshi. Now, when we talk about Russia-Ukraine conflict and we look at the demands and the asks of both the sides, well, European side and, of course, Ukraine has been asking for Article 5-like guarantees. But can these guarantees really substitute for NATO's Article 5, especially without legal obligation or military intervention? And can these be enforced by future governments? And most importantly, if we could just go back to the basics and see what could these Article 5-like guarantees look like?
Well, I think between you and me, what Ukraine would really look for is an American guarantee. That would have credibility. See, the rest of NATO, they just don't have the kind of military capacity which could take on Russia. So either it's NATO again depends on American military might at this juncture. So I don't see, one of the big reasons why Ukraine does not want to surrender the rest of Donbass is that they have built a defensive line there. And they think that if the Russians occupy this area, the rest of Ukraine becomes more vulnerable. And they think that the consequences of this will be that Ukraine will become more vulnerable to the Russians, because so far they have been able to fight back the Russians in the Donbass front with considerable grit and considerable losses. Both sides have had losses, but the Ukrainians recently they've had some additional setbacks in that area. But in terms of guarantees, I cannot see any. Either it's a NATO Article 5 guarantee or it is a straightforward American guarantee. See, the problem with Ukraine is that under the Budapest Memorandum of, I think, 1993 or 1995, all the major powers had given a guarantee to Ukraine, including Russia. But all of them, when Ukraine was invaded, when Crimea was taken over by the Russians, no one did anything. The Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons capacity, their nuclear-equipped missiles. They gave it all up because they were promised security. And now, in 2022, they realized that nothing worked. So all these people who have been providing guarantees, at the end of the day, your best guarantee is your own military capacity. And the Ukrainians have built it up considerably. They are now a pretty formidable military machine. They are able to take on the Russians, strike deep inside Russia. So I think they don't want to simply follow what Trump is saying, because that is really tantamount to surrender.
Right, Mr. Bansal, fair point you have made, and that essentially is the larger question that, what are these guarantees without any legal or military intervention? And what really happens in case if there is a regime change, or if there is a government change, rather, in the United States? And you've given very many instances of what's transpired in the past. Mr. Bansal, would you like to weigh in on that? And if those guarantees cannot be ensured, then what will stop Russia from, annexing more of Ukraine's territories and from its aggression?
See, I think what history teaches us is these guarantees really have no meaning. And as Mr. Joshi rightly brought out, Ukraine was given a lot of guarantees when it actually surrendered its nuclear weapons, which have not been adhered to. Similarly, of course, the Western world had also given a lot of guarantees to Moscow when Soviet Union disintegrated, that there will be no eastward expansion of NATO and things like that, which have not been adhered to. So to my mind, at this juncture, unless, of course, there is a US guarantee, I don't think so any other guarantee would work. Maybe there may be a demilitarized zone in between or something. A better proposition from Ukraine's point of view would have been the Minsk Accord, where I think Donetsk and Luhansk were given certain amount of autonomy rather than a complete merger with Russia. But the way things are moving around, I think Ukraine has very little cards left with it other than the support from European countries. And most of the European countries have shown in the past that when push comes to shove, they often surrender in front of the US might and US economic power. We saw the way EU negotiated with the US on the tariffs issue. They virtually yielded to most of the US demands. So I don't really visualize, other than giving a psychological and a temporary assurance that, yes, there'll be no invasion. There can never be any foolproof guarantee against our future Russian invasion. And of course, as Trump has shown, that one regime in US may not adhere to agreements that were actually reached by the previous regime. We have seen that at numerous places across the globe as far as US regimes are concerned. So it is really difficult as to what sort of an assurance does President Trump give to Zelenskyy before he agrees to all the propositions which he's putting across. Because obviously when he says that now the ball is in Zelenskyy and Europe's court, he obviously expects them to yield on territory. Now, what territory, how much territory is debatable. And that's what I think one would look at.
No, Mr. Bansal, as you look at it that way, and given the aspect of what you were saying earlier as well, it is difficult for, to predict how Trump is going to be navigating this one. And given the fact that what Mr. Joshi was talking about, how considerable amount of grit, and the other aspect of both sides having had their own losses and additional setbacks. But let me ask you this, Mr. Bansal, will Trump's pressure on Ukraine be seen as a red flag by American allies?
Well, they would definitely not be very happy about it, and I think that we have got it. But I don't think so. in recent past, what we have seen is that most of them tend to yield to whatever the US pressure is. So they will definitely feel upset about it, but it depends if the bigger two or three, that is France, Germany, and UK, if they take a stand, then yes, then maybe Ukraine has the option of rejecting US proposals. But if they also fall by the wayside and they also succumb to what the US pressure is, I don't think so Zelensky has any other option, because in the absence of Western military aid, Zelensky will not be able to withstand the Russian onslaught. They have fought very well. In fact, they have shown tremendous grit. And after the initial setback, they have really shown an exemplary, they've given a very exemplary account of themselves. But please remember, this was only feasible because of liberal military aid from the West. So if the Europeans and Americans actually pull out, Americans in any case, from Trump's tone, it is very clear what he wants. If the European allies also bow to Trump's dictates, I don't think so Zelensky has any other options.
Right. Mr. Joshi, let me come to you. What could be offered by Russia as part of these negotiations, given the fact that both the leaders on Saturday said that the talks went really well? And of course, this is the beginning of a new era of Russia-US relations. At least that's what was hinted by President Putin. So what can we expect President Putin to yield and, of course, to offer, and what will be acceptable to him?
Well, what will be acceptable to him is a difficult thing, because I think right now he feels he's winning and he's after his maximalist demands. But what would be reasonable, I would think, you see, the parts of eastern Ukraine which Russia is occupying were Russian-speaking majority areas. You know, the Russian-speaking people lived there. So I can understand a certain in the present circumstances. That's why I said that if the current battlefront could be a ceasefire line, that could be an important concession on the part of Russia. And secondly, as I said, if they withdrew in Zaporizhia and Kherson, that's in the south of Ukraine. So that could be an important concession by the Russian. And thereafter, they would get to still keep 20% of Ukraine, which is the balance of the Donetsk, the Donbass, and the Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, as well as Crimea. And as I said, the other issue is that of NATO. And there, I think that if the Russians are willing to accept the US as a guarantor, I think that would be also a useful concession. So there has to be give and take. The current formula, what Putin is talking about is literally surrender. What he's saying is that the Ukrainians should surrender. So there is a big difference between give and take and surrender. And Ukraine also needs to guarantee its future security as well, because if they lose the eastern part, they are also losing one of the most industrialist parts and resource-rich parts of Ukraine. So it will be a kind of a double whammy if they are asked to shell out to forego the rest of the Donetsk province as well.
Absolutely, that would be seen as a double whammy. But let me also get in a word from you, Mr. Bansal, given what we saw Prime Minister Modi also, in fact, put out on social media today. Calibrated words today, support for peace, but no reference to specifics. In fact, taking that into context for our viewers as well as to what the Prime Minister essentially said, where he, of course, thanked his friend, President Putin, for the phone call and for sharing insights on his meeting with Trump. And India has consistently called for a peaceful resolution of the Ukraine conflict. Mr. Bansal, as we read into that and your perspective over the same, because we know how these words of the Prime Minister has resonated earlier as well with the earlier comments that he had on the conflict. All in all, the timing of this, how do you look at that?
See, India has always been for peace, and I think the Russia-Ukraine conflict is not in our interest. Actually, the resolution would be beneficial to India. But when Alaska meeting happened, I think one fear which I think many in India had was that the way European Union, Japan, etc., have come to deals with US at US terms and conditions. If Russia had also reached some sort of a deal with US, maybe India would have been isolated globally, apart from China and Brazil, with which we are trying to create a joint front or something like that. I think President Putin's call would have been reassuring that BRICS bloc as a whole is probably standing together. And I think in the face of this economic onslaught, which has actually been unleashed from DC, I think there is a need for at least the BRICS bloc to stand together. There is no doubt that peace deal is in our interest. And I think if this peace deal comes about, and it will be nice, but it should be, I think, not one-way traffic. I think it should not be seen as solely dictated by President Trump, because in that sort of a scenario, I'm not very sure whether he would be reconsidering tariffs or things like that. But I think if there is some negotiation, some give and take, and I think work out, I think it will be in India's interest. I think when Russia-Ukraine war broke out, we realized that it was not in our interest. And I think ending this conflict will be in our interest. And I think India has always supported peaceful resolution of this conflict.
Right, Mr. Bansal, and that's also reflected in the Prime Minister's statement as well, when he held those talks with President Putin just a short while back. But let me come to you, Mr. Joshi, now that we're talking of the BRICS bloc, and of course there is a move to strengthen that bloc by President Putin, and, the US President also seems to be sort of turning to President Putin as well. In fact, he's sort of reignited that relationship. He's always said good things about Putin. So all of these developments, do you think they gave Putin a leg up, not just against Zelenskyy, but also against a cohort of European leaders? If that's the case, then what will be the trump card in bringing about a peace deal?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out what is it that Trump is looking for. I don't think we should assume that he has good feelings for BRICS. He wants to destroy BRICS. And he has said it in so many words. Basically, what Trump is looking for is spheres of interest, dividing the world in spheres of interest. The American sphere of interest will be the American continent, North and South America. He wants to buy Greenland. He wants to control Panama. So he wants the American sphere of interest in the American continent. In Europe, I think he's willing to let the Russians be the dominant power. And in Asia, I'm afraid he might want the Chinese to do the same. He might be willing to make deals with China and with Russia and basically divide the world in three spheres of interest, which definitely will not be in our interests at all. So, as I said, I'm not sure whether actually Trump is after this, because Trump can change very dramatically from one end to the other. But definitely I have seen signs that he wants a certain area to be very much part of the American sphere of interest. And Europe is not, he doesn't see Europe necessarily as part of that sphere of interest. He sees the US, he sees the whole thing in an hierarchical way, with the US at the top, maybe Russia or China underneath, but that's it. He doesn't particularly care for India. I don't think he's really takes India very seriously in his calculations. I think that has become obvious in recent times. So I think we have to watch out for what exactly Trump is after, because Captain Bansal spoke about the midterm elections next year. My worry is not the issue of midterm. My worry is that this reflects the thinking of the MAGA movement in the United States. And so this may outlive Trump. This may outlive Trump. And I'm saying this with all seriousness. as a person who has professionally studied the United States and written a PhD on US history, that the US is in a very, what should I say, transformative situation. We do not know the depth of the MAGA movement. Trump is just representing it.
Absolutely, Mr. Joshi, and which is why this is Donald Trump's most crucial moment yet, as he's trying to end the war. And even as the world is watching Washington, the question once again isn't just whether peace is possible, but whether peace can be achieved without betraying the map. That remains a larger question, and those questions will become clearer even as we will be watching out for those talks, which will happen in just a few hours from now with President Zelenskyy and, of course, all the leaders, a lot of the leaders from Europe as well. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on ET Now and sharing your thoughts. I appreciate you taking the time out.